The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated.
Welcome back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with the panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound, and they are our panel, yours and mine, and I want to thank all our listeners for your absolutely fantastic questions. I'm very proud of our listeners for our wonderful questions, or your wonderful questions, I should say, that you've been asking us. We will be answering your emails today, and we have a question from John, who lives in Richmond, Virginia. John has an excellent question. He asks, is political polarization a symptom or a strategy? Are politicians and media outlets actively fueling division for strategic gain? How does polarization affect civic engagement and trust in institutions? Can bipartisan efforts still succeed in today's climate, or are they performative? Wow. Really great questions there, John. We will do our best to answer them. So, our panel. Scott, Mark?
Well, let's take the first one. Let's take them one at a time.
Sounds good.
Symptom or strategy, Scott?
I think it's a symptom, except for the fact that think tanks like the Heritage Foundation have kind of taken the dissatisfaction that conservatives had with the status quo for many years and have managed to use media outlets like Fox and right-wing radio to create a powerful movement where it's become more of a political strategy. And I quote, one of the most frightening quotes is from Kevin Roberts, who's a PhD. He's the president of the Heritage Foundation. And he said, "We are in the process of a second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be," which I found really chilling. I think he said that last summer, July 2025. 2024 or August 2024. And I really thought it was a remarkable thing to say.
All right, so let me try to put this as best I possibly can. I think it's a strategy, as Scott has pointed out, from like the Heritage Foundation, of which the right has adopted. It is a strategy, and I think it's a strategy that has completely screwed up the left. They don't know how to respond to it. Is it a symptom? I don't know if it's exactly a symptom, because it seems the left doesn't have the polarization that the right seems to have. However, to qualify that, the left, again, can't seem to make a determination as exactly who and what they are. And we've talked about that in numerous times here on the podcast. They don't seem to have a strategy that's going to work and going to speak to the voters. They going after Trump didn't seem to work, obviously, because they lost in 2024. They don't seem to have an answer to the polarization that the Heritage Foundation, Fox News, OAN, Newsmax has created. They can't break that mold. They just can't break it. And I think that the strategy is the Heritage Foundation and the right. And I think the symptom of pretty much bumbling their way through it is on the left. They just have not had an answer for it, in my mind. So it kind of goes, I hate to say it, goes both ways, depends on which side you're looking at.
Now, I should say that I have conservative friends, and
still?
No, not too much anymore, but I did for a while. And they claim that they found themselves to be not represented by the media, which is why they needed their own media. And they thought it was the fault of bias. And my answer to that was, well, if it is the fault of bias, then the antidote is not more bias on the other side, but trying to figure out a way to get everybody into the middle. But they rejected that approach, and they decided to set up their own networks. And here, if I've taught mass media, mass communication before, and what you find is that after a while in pretty much all media, the fragmentation happens where people find their own thing in the media. And so it's a fairly natural development for people with a right-wing point of view to say, I don't want Walter Cronkite talking to me anymore. I want Sean Hannity to talk to me. And I like what he says better. And, I guess the passing of a Walter Cronkite and some of these other guys who, when there were only 3 networks, basically, and you only had a choice of those 3, they all pretty much echoed the same thing, whether it was, just a general agreement on what the top story was in the news, what was important for people to know, how they kept out things that apparently mattered to conservatives that didn't matter to mainstream people, middle of the road people, liberal people, and that they found themselves not represented there. And I guess you could look back on it and see, like, the civil rights movement would probably be the biggest part of that, right? It's possible that the Vietnam War was a big part of that they didn't feel that their views on these things were being fairly represented, and that they were cast as villains more often than not, and that they were something that had to be overcome. And yeah, I just watched yesterday a Netflix show about the Ed Sullivan Show. I didn't grow up watching Ed Sullivan. I kind of may have seen it a couple of times, but I knew that, like, he had introduced Elvis Presley and then he introduced the Beatles, and a friend of mine actually saw the Rolling Stones the first time they played when he was about 5 years old. But I had no idea that Ed Sullivan's mission was to integrate television by having acts that were African American acts, like Motown and Stevie Wonder and so on. And that this was a deliberate strategy on his part, because growing up in Harlem as he did, he felt that Black Americans were going through, and Hispanic Americans were going through the same thing that Irish Americans had gone through when his father was younger, and he wanted to avoid that. And so he was welcoming people who were not represented in the mainstream, Black entertainers, Nat King Cole and Sam and Dave, et cetera, and really embracing them and trying to bring them into the mainstream. That approach apparently was rejected by a lot of people and his ratings kept going down and down until finally in 1971, he lost the show altogether. And it was right around that time, right, where the Powell memo came out, where the conservatives decided that they had to have a concerted, multi-pronged effort to bring conservatism into the mainstream through colleges, universities, think tanks, endowing professors with a right-wing viewpoint. And the left has never really caught up on that, because the left was the main representatives in all of those endeavors, right? I mean, I think we'll all say that most college professors that I've met, I can only think of 2 that I know of who are really conservative. Most entertainers seem to be fairly liberal. And so, at least in the public eye, liberal was the mainstream, and the antidote to that was creating all these mechanisms to promote right-wing, thought, which really, I think, in a sense, culminated in Fox becoming what it is today, and all the offshoots that it has, and leading to the polarization that we're experiencing now.
Yeah. And when we talk about, just to a point that you made about college professors, I would really say that you're right. They probably leaned more left socially. Many of the when I went to Shepherd Broad Law, I found that many of them were policy conservative, but were socially liberal. And many of the professors that I know, let's take one that we all had together, Berna, who thought Nixon was the greatest president ever on the face of the earth, was policy conservative, but socially kind of liberal. So there's that with professors. But this does answer the second part, which is, are politicians and media outlets actively fueling division for strategic gain? My answer is yes, they are. That's why we have Fox. That's why we have OAN. That's why we have Newsmax. That's why we have MSNBC. And that's where the Young Turks come from. That's where Brian Taylor Cohen comes from, and all of those now social media outlets that are out there. And yeah, it's basically to create an echo chamber so that you hear what you want to hear, and you hear maybe the same news, but you hear it presented to you in a way that you've already made your decision on, confirmation bias. And that lets you, I guess, feel better about yourself, and basically allows you not to have to question your own previous views, which unfortunately is the antithesis to critical and analytical thinking, which is something that we lack so terribly now today. But yeah, the Walter Cronkites, I always tell my students there are no more Walter Cronkites in the world. And you're right, there was only three basic actually, in my 4, because you had PBS as well. PBS also had, they all kind of agreed on what the big story was. And they said, okay, here it is. And you didn't get some talking head coming in to tell you what to think about it. Walter Cronkite just put it out there. There it is. You figure it out. This is what happened. Here are the facts. And we are sorely lacking in that. And I honestly don't think the society, as it's evolved in its consumption of news, I don't think it could go back to that. It wants to be told what to think. It wants to be told, the interpretation of the information that they're having. So yeah, I mean, basically these outlets and the politicians, they saw the opening. They saw the constituencies as sheep. And they said, okay, fine. We're going to take that and run. And that's not only Republicans, it's Democrats as well. But the fact is, Republicans just are better at it. They're just better at it. As is, those right-wing media outlets. They're just better at it. So when you start watching these outlets and you start, seeing the information that they're disseminating, they truly are doing just like was back in the Cronkite days. They're disseminating the same story. They're just interpreting what it means differently. What the word socialism means. When did that become a bad word? I really don't know. When did socialism become a bad word? We have had socialist programs in the United States for forever. Come on, guys. That goes against capitalism. No, it doesn't. One's an economic theory, the other one's a social theory. And if you don't have strong capitalism, you can't have socialism. I mean, do you think Sweden, Denmark, and Norway don't produce anything, and they're able to, give out this stuff? Well, they have higher taxes. True, they have higher taxes, but you don't worry for anything.
Yeah.
You don't worry for
anything. And they're happier.
And they're happy. I mean, my wife and I just had cataract surgery, and my wife and I sat down and when she retired, we didn't have insurance for a year. And what she paid in a year for insurance was like $7,000 a year, which is what she paid. Plus, you had to pay your 20% on top of that. For my cataract surgery and my one visit to the doctor, it was $6,000. We basically saved ourselves about $2,000 not having insurance, because that's the way the math works, people. That's just the way the math works. So, what if you didn't have to worry about that? What if you knew you could go to the doctor and get what the treatment that you needed to get? Well, I mean, what would that be like? We don't know. And we're the only industrialized country in the world that does not know. Everybody else knows. but we don't, because
Well,
we've been told by these outlets and the politicians trying to come up with that division, get their get their leg up, their unfair advantage, that things like socialism is bad.
No. So one of the other, and we'd be remiss not to mention gerrymandering, and the summer of gerrymandering seems to be the big story, right? Which is that politicians are able to choose their voters rather than voters choosing their politicians.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, Republicans are better at it, at least at the moment. And both sides have always done it. But it was more or less to protect like a favorite son politician rather than to, have a district that was all one thing. And we've seen in recent years, right down there in South Carolina, the change in Nancy Mace from when she was in a non-protected, open to anyone's seat, to when they gerrymandered her district for her, and now she really can't be beat in her district. And the change in her demeanor, her attitude, her pronouncements, her, frankly, insanity, it really seems to be a big difference. I grew up in Brooklyn, which Republicans never mattered in. So there was never any doubt that every politician was going to be a Democrat, and it was Democrats fighting Democrats all the time in Brooklyn. And there's enough Democrats in Brooklyn to really almost flip a presidential race. I mean, it's that densely populated with just Democrats. And every 10 years they reapportion the based on the census, they reapportion districts, and they were able to keep everyone that they wanted in Congress if they had a stray, who didn't adhere to the party line, like Stephen Solars did in the late 1970s, I think, or early 80s. They simply districted him out. They redistricted him out because he wasn't being a good boy. That's the kind of power that political powers have. The other part of it, I think, is that, and I've heard politicians say this, senators say this, that they don't hang out together anymore. And that it used to be that they spent more time together. And there's been a lot of research that indicates that the more time we spend together, the more we realize that the divisions that are between us are not that important, and we can actually come together and work together. Mark, you'll remember when we were debating the speaker, when the Republicans were trying to choose a speaker and they kept going through one guy after another, I kept saying, hey, how about the guy who was the leader of the Problem Solvers Caucus, Fitzpatrick, I think his name is, right, from New Jersey. I think it's New Jersey or Pennsylvania, one of those. And he never even got mentioned, but he would have been acceptable probably to enough Democrats that they could have had a speaker who represents both parties adequately enough so that there would be peace in the world. But his name never even came up. It was disturbing to me, because it seems so obvious that you could have this guy who's a problem solver, who's a peace seeker, who's a conflict resolutionist. And the guy is not like a weak dude. He was an FBI agent, I think. And, he's a hero in his own right. Never could get the time of day. So I think the extremes on both sides are the ones who are talking the loudest. I know my older brother and I was debating our wives this weekend because they watch MSNBC, from 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock or whenever they fall asleep. And I think MSNBC does exactly what Fox does, except not probably as well, but it makes you angry.
Yes.
It's designed to make you unhappy. And I just said, you want to be in happier people? Turn off the damn TV. or watch sports like I do, or
Except the
something.
Mets. Don't watch the Mets. They've been pretty bad this last couple of games.
Right, but even in their own bumbling, lovable way, as disturbing as it is, it's just to be expected that they're going to throw the ball all over the field and not know how to throw anymore to first base, even, or forget about home. But in any event, they're good. Media is good at what they do. They're not amateurs. They're good at what they do, and we need to find a better way to stop the polarization that is going on.
I keep thinking about the border bill when Biden was president. Additional officers were going to be hired, where additional attorneys were going to be hired, where additional equipment was going to be brought in to help process people who were at the border waiting already, and people with appointments and so on. And that was a bipartisan Border Solutions Act. And you had Republican, they had representative. It was like Tony Gonzalez. He was a representative from Texas. And you had Senator, it was John Cornyn, Republican. You had Kristen Sinema. She's a Democrat, or she may be independent now, I don't know. But at the time, she's from Arizona. You had Henry Cuellar, who's a Democrat. You had Republican James Langford, who is as well, he's a senator. A number of people supported this, and I believe it passed the Senate. And Trump then, who was not even in office, said to Mike Johnson, the speaker, you can't let this pass. You can't fund this. I don't want it. And Johnson, instead of focusing on the American people and what the nation needed and following his oath of office, went ahead and acted in a very partisan manner, killed the bill. The bipartisan individuals who had worked together and worked for months on this bill were outraged. So individuals who try to work together can be punished when one person who is at the apex, such as the current occupant of the White House, is a partisan actor. And then other people follow suit, like Greg Abbott, for example.
Yeah,
they're not entitled. Go ahead.
Langford voted against his own bill.
He did.
He was one of the architects of that bill, and he voted against it because Trump told him to.
Yeah, well, see, that to me is a mistake. He should have voted for his own bill,
and they haven't voted up. That it hasn't come back, which is a really strange part.
Yeah,
because it would go a long way to providing some kind of comprehensive immigration reform, but they're firing judges rather than hiring more judges, and it doesn't really seem that makes a difference whether the immigrants are here legally or illegally. If they're immigrants, they're in trouble.
So to get back to John's question, I see this as being cyclical. I mean, like, you can go back again to The Conservative Mind, written by is it William F. Buckley, first put into place by Reagan. Whenever it was Reagan was first elected, they had the same book that they've got now to help the conservative president along with his agenda and to tell him what to do. And
but Brooke, you mentioned Buckley. Buckley kicked the John Birch Society out of the conservative movement. I don't think I don't think Trump would kick the John Birch Society out of the MAGA movement. I think that he would embrace them being in there. He might just say, I've never heard of them. He'll do his usual thing where, and so racism is not something that they're running away from anymore.
Correct. A lot of people are saying that they're not conservative enough.
But before we get too far afield, this part of the question, how does polarization affect civil engagement and trust in institutions, is a really important question, I think. And what we're seeing more and more is the destruction of these institutions, right? And I think, Mark, I'm assuming you would agree that institutions that have really held this country together have come under assault. And I mean, it does seem to make more sense if you look at it from the point of view of somebody who wants to destroy America on behalf of a foreign adversary who supports him very well, or has something on him, or however you want to, because there's not much more you can say about it. RFK Jr. today said he's going after the prevention task force that helps doctors understand what preventative measures will keep the population healthy. And it's just 16 doctors who work together evaluating various medical journals and things to come up with guidelines to help physicians. It's the reason why women get mammograms beginning at age 40 instead of 50 was their recommendation. It's, from what I've read, has saved 25,000 lives since they've done that. And the Trump administration wants to get rid of it. So these institutions that we rely on are being undermined. For what reason? I have no idea, but they all are. We don't trust anybody anymore.
Yeah. And first of all, before I answer to that, I want everybody to know, yes, I am in South Carolina. Nancy Mace is not in my district. And it is very surprising that she could win down there because she's down by Charleston. And Charleston is generally a pretty Democrat hold. But I noticed as I'm looking at her district, it doesn't include the main city of Charleston. It basically is all the swampland around. So she is the representative to the United States Congress from the Great Swampland. Also, she is not going to probably be running again because she's running for governor of South Carolina. That will be an interesting. That's a big talk here in the Palmetto State as far as that. But yeah, I would agree with Scott, and I think that the idea of crushing down institutions, and I think that goes to the last part. Can bipartisan efforts still, or is it performative? I think they do the bipartisan is a show. I think it's performative, and I think it shows when somebody puts up a bill and then votes against it. So that is a problem all in itself. And at the same time, that kind of action definitely erodes the trust in the institution itself. How can you put a bill forward? Put your heart and soul into this bill, creating it, and then vote against it. What am I supposed to trust? Did you waste your time doing something on that you didn't believe in? I mean, what is the story into that? So yeah, I would have to say that I totally agree with Scott.
Do you think he was threatened? Sorry, do you think?
But I mean, I don't. Again, I'm not going to make assumptions as to why, but the fact is that for whatever reason, if I create a bill, I'm going to support the thing until it either gets defeated by somebody else. I'm not just going to, because somebody threatens or somebody says this, that, or the other. I don't care. And I think that a lot of the reasons that we are losing the trust in the institutions is because the institution no longer has the gravitas that it once had. And that's because the people within the institution, and I'm talking about the elected institutions. I'm not talking about the institutions that are bureaucrats. I'm talking about the elected institutions. They are so afraid of their constituency. They're terrified of their constituency. They've now become ineffectual. I don't care from what district you come from. If you're a representative in the Congress, even if you get 70% of the vote, 30% of the people voted against you. Your responsibility is to represent all 100%, not the 70 that just liked you, everybody. And that means there's got to be some bipartisan thought within the representative to understand, hey, I've got to look out for all of my constituents. And it goes back to a great story when Georgia, there was a representative who showed up from Georgia. He was a doctor. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But he said, when they were asking about independence, he says, I can vote to what I think my constituents had sent me here, but they sent me here for my opinion, for my beliefs. Therefore, I'm going to vote what I think is right. And I'll suffer the consequences when I go back. And that's exactly the way it's supposed to work. And it does not work that way anymore. And so I would say, yes, they're performative. And yes, polarization has truly damaged all the trust in the institutions simply because the institutions are becoming ineffectual. But those, again, are the elected institutions. I think, as Scott points out, the Department of Health, all of those bureaucratic institutions that are out there, they're the ones doing their job. I mean, they truly are the people doing their job. And you can villainize them, vilify them all you want, but the fact is that they're doing their job. It is your elected officials that you, Americans of the United States, put there that is causing the pain and the suffering. That if you feel it, it's your own fault because you've now got the government you deserve. And hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you, John, for the question. And thank you to all our listeners. We appreciate your support, and thank you for subscribing. If you are not yet subscribed on the platform of your choice, please do so. Subscribing is free. We have no paywalls, and we do look forward to seeing you again on the Nova Society.
The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Apple iTunes, the largest source of podcasts and music on the internet, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your source for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. We'd also like to thank all of our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a question or comment, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So for Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power in society is knowledge. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next time. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, BH Conflict Resolution Services, a full-service dispute resolution firm offering expert, cost-effective mediation services to couples, groups, and businesses. BHCRS can be reached at www.bhcrs.com.